Welcome to Whisper Facts 101. Here is 101 fascinating facts about the abandoned resort. I never should have gone back to that place. But sometimes your past pulls you toward the very spots you've spent years trying to forget. The Sunset Paradise Resort had been rotting in the Florida heat for 15 years when I finally worked up the courage to return. I was 12 the last time I'd been there, on what was supposed to be our family's final vacation before my parents' divorce. Now I was 27, driving down that same cracked asphalt road, Spanish moss hanging like funeral shrouds from the oak trees. The rusted gate hung open, barely clinging to its hinges. Warning signs covered in graffiti tried to keep people out, but teenagers had been sneaking in for years. I could see their beer cans glinting in the weeds, broken glass scattered across what used to be the main walkway. The lobby doors were boarded up, but I remembered the service entrance around back. My heart hammered as I walked through overgrown hibiscus bushes, their once bright flowers now brittle and brown. The humidity pressed against my skin like wet fabric, and something rustled in the palmetto scrub nearby. That service door opened with a groan that echoed through the empty corridors. The smell hit me immediately, mold, decay, and something else. Something sweet and wrong that made my stomach turn. My phone's flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing water-stained walls and ceiling tiles hanging like broken teeth. I forced myself toward the pool area, where it had happened. Where I'd seen him that last day, floating face down in the chlorinated water, while families splashed and laughed around him, oblivious. The man in the Hawaiian shirt, who'd been drinking alone at the tiki bar for 3 days straight. But that's not what I came back to remember. The pool was empty now, filled with stagnant rainwater and debris. Plastic chairs lay scattered like bones, and the diving board had snapped in half. I stood at the edge where I'd stood 15 years ago, remembering how the lifeguard had blown his whistle, how the screaming had started, how my mother had grabbed me and pressed my face against her shoulder, so I wouldn't see them pulling the body out. That's when I heard the footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps echoing from somewhere deeper in the resort. I told myself it was just the building settling, pipes creaking, anything but what my racing pulse suggested. But the footsteps had rhythm, purpose. They were moving toward me. I should have run then. Instead, I followed the sound, my flashlight beam dancing across moldy carpet and peeling wallpaper. The footsteps led me down the hallway toward the guest rooms, stopping and starting like whoever was making them wanted to be followed. Room 237. The door stood ajar. I pushed it open with trembling fingers. The room was exactly as I remembered it, not from our family vacation, but from that night 2 weeks ago when I'd first started having the dreams. Dreams where I wasn't 12 anymore, where I wasn't an innocent witness to a stranger's death. Dreams where I remembered what really happened at the pool that day. The newspaper clipping lay on the rotting bedspread, yellowed and water-damaged but still readable. Local boy questioned in resort death. A 12-year-old boy had been seen talking to the victim minutes before the drowning. Police found no evidence of foul play. My hands shook as I picked up the article. There was my school photo, grainy and small, but unmistakably me. And there, in the final paragraph, was the detail that had been buried, forgotten, lost in the chaos of my parents' divorce and our hasty departure from town. The man hadn't been drunk when he went into the pool. The medication bottles were still there too, lined up on the nightstand like soldiers. The same prescription sleeping pills I'd stolen from my mother's purse and crushed into his drink while he sat alone at that tiki bar, crying about his own divorce, his own failures. I'd told myself it was just a prank, just something to make the sad man go to sleep. But 12-year-old boys don't understand lethal doses. The footsteps behind me had stopped. I turned around slowly, expecting to see him standing there, the man I'd killed with my childish revenge against all the adults who were ruining everything. Instead, I saw myself, 12 years old, standing in the doorway with that same confused expression I'd worn in the police station, that same lie forming on my lips. The boy looked at me with eyes that held no forgiveness, no understanding. Only the terrible knowledge of what we'd done, and what we'd have to keep doing. The sleeping pills I'd brought with me felt heavy in my pocket. Old habits, after all, die hard. They demolished Eastgate Shopping Center last month, but I keep dreaming about walking through those hollow corridors. 23 years I worked security there, watching that place die one store at a time. By the end, it was just me, the echoing footsteps of my rounds, and the ghosts of what used to be. I should have retired when Spencer's closed. That's when I knew it was really over. But Harold, the property manager, kept begging me to stay. Someone needs to watch the place, he'd say. Insurance requires it. Just until we find a buyer. The buyer never came. Those final 2 years, I was alone with 47 empty storefronts and a food court that smelled like grease and broken dreams. My flashlight would sweep across dusty display windows and peeling mall directory signs, past the fountain that had been drained and filled with cigarette butts. The teenagers found ways in, of course. They always do. Broken fire exit doors, gaps in the fence around the loading dock. I'd chase them out during the day, but at night, I'd hear them moving through the darkness above me. Footsteps on the second level, laughter echoing from the old arcade. I told myself it was just kids having fun in a dead place. But dead places have their own rules. The sound started getting stranger around month 18. Not just footsteps, but voices. Conversations drifting from empty stores, cash registers beeping in shops that had been cleared out years ago. I'd follow the sounds, but they'd always stop just before I reached them. Harold said it was the building settling, old ventilation systems, anything but what we both suspected. The mall was remembering itself, playing back decades of human activity like some kind of concrete recording device. That's when I started carrying the notebook. Every sound, every strange occurrence, every impossible thing I witnessed went into that spiral-bound pad. Page after page of careful documentation, because even I knew how crazy it sounded. Cash register at Spencer's location, 3:17 a.m. Children's laughter from Disney store, heard for 47 minutes. Woman crying in Macy's fitting room, October 15th through 22nd. The notebook filled up fast. The worst was the music. Tinny Christmas carols would drift from the old Radio Shack every December, even though the power had been cut to that section for 3 years. I'd stand outside that grated storefront, listening to Silent Night played on damaged speakers, and I swear I could see the warm glow of display lights through the gaps. But I never looked too closely. Some things are better left alone. On my final night, I decided to break that rule. The Christmas music was playing again, even though it was July. I pushed through the half-open security gate and stepped into what used to be Radio Shack. My flashlight revealed empty shelves and exposed wiring, but the music kept playing, coming from deeper in the store. That's where I found the old security monitors. They were still plugged in somehow, still recording. Screen after screen showing the mall as it used to be, packed with shoppers, bright with neon signs, alive with the chaos of commerce. I watched families walking past the camera angles, teenagers hanging out by the fountain, employees opening stores for another day of business. Except the timestamp said it was live footage. I spun around, expecting to see the crowds my monitors were showing, but there was only darkness and decay. When I turned back to the screens, I saw myself, 23 years younger, starting my first shift, eager and proud to be Eastgate's new security guard. But that's not what made me run. In every screen, in every angle, there was another figure. A hunched shape following just out of camera range, staying in the shadows, tracking my younger self through those bright, busy corridors. And I recognized the shambling walk, the way the shoulders curved inward. It was me, present me, the me that had been walking these halls alone for 2 years, growing stranger and more hollow with each empty night. I'd been haunting my own past. The demolition crew found my notebook 3 weeks later, along with 23 years of incident reports. They said I'd documented every single day, every shift, every moment I'd spent in that mall. The dates were all correct, the details all accurate. Except according to the employment records, I'd died of a heart attack in the security office on my very first day. The mall had been empty for 23 years. I can still smell the machine oil and rust whenever it rains. 38 years I worked the line at Hartwell Manufacturing, watching those conveyor belts carry brake pads and gaskets toward the shipping dock. The rhythm of that place lived in my bones. The hiss of hydraulics, the clank of metal on metal, the whistle that marked each shift change. When they announced the closure in March of 2019, I thought I'd be relieved. Retirement at 62 wasn't ideal, but my back couldn't take much more of the lifting and bending. Linda said we'd travel, maybe see those grandkids in Oregon more often. But the factory kept calling me back. At first, it was just drive-bys. I'd tell Linda I was going to the hardware store, then find myself parked outside the chain-link fence, staring at those dark windows. The for sale sign grew more weathered each month, and weeds started pushing through cracks in the loading dock. Security was minimal, just old Pete Martinez doing rounds twice a week. We'd worked different shifts for years, but Pete knew me well enough. When I asked if I could look around one last time, he handed over his key without question. That was my first mistake. The machine floor felt wrong in the silence. All those years of noise, and now you could hear your own breathing echo off the concrete walls. My footsteps sounded hollow as I walked between the covered equipment, past workstations where I'd spent decades of my life. Station 12. My station, where I'd assembled countless brake assemblies, where I'd eaten lunch at the same metal stool, where I'd counted down the days until retirement. Someone had left a coffee mug on the bench, my coffee mug, the one Linda bought me for our 20th anniversary. But I'd cleaned out my locker months ago, taken everything home. I picked up the mug anyway. It was still warm. That's when I heard the machinery start up. Not all of it, just the line I'd worked. The conveyor belt jerked to life with that familiar squeal, and I could hear the hydraulic press cycling in the distance. The smell of heated metal drifted through the stale air, mixing with the acrid scent of cutting fluid. I should have run then. Should have dropped that warm mug and gotten out of there. Instead, I found myself walking toward the sound, drawn by 38 years of muscle memory and routine. The line was running empty, but the motions were all correct. Belt speed at regulation pace, press timing exactly as I remembered it. Even the safety lights were cycling properly, yellow to green to red and back again. And there, at Station 12, was the piece I'd been working on during my last shift. Half-assembled brake housing, exactly as I'd left it when the shutdown whistle blew. The serial number was even the same, BH47391. I knew because I'd been staring at those numbers when the chest pains started. My hands moved without conscious thought, reaching for tools that shouldn't have been there, continuing the assembly process I'd never finished. The motions felt natural, comforting even. This was what I knew. This was who I was. The part clicked into place with satisfying precision. The conveyor belt carried it toward the next station, where Martinez was supposed to add the secondary gasket. But Martinez had retired 6 months before the closure. The station stood empty, belt running past unmanned tools. So I followed the part down the line. Station 13, Martinez's old spot. I'd watched him work here for 15 years, knew the process by heart. My hands found his tools, continued the assembly. The muscle memory felt foreign at first, then familiar, like putting on an old coat. The part moved on to Station 14, Henderson's station. Henderson, who died in that car accident back in 2017. I took his place too, adding components I'd never installed, but somehow knew how to handle. By the time the part reached Station 22, I'd worked every position on the line. 38 years of watching my co-workers, learning their techniques, absorbing their methods through proximity and repetition. The finished brake assembly rolled toward the quality check station at the end of the line, where Tommy Nakamura used to inspect each piece before stamping it for shipment. Tommy, who'd had the heart attack 3 weeks before I did. I picked up his inspection tools and began the final check. The assembly was perfect, every measurement within tolerance, every connection solid. I raised the approval stamp, ready to mark another job complete. That's when I saw the shipping manifest. One brake assembly, part number BH47391. Shipped to Hartwell Memorial Gardens, plot 247. My plot. The grave where they'd buried me 18 months ago, right after my heart attack on the factory floor. The line had been running all along, I realized. Not the machinery, that had been silent and still for years. It was us. All of us who died working here, still trying to finish that last shift, complete that final assembly, punch out one more time. I stamped the part anyway. Old habits die hard. The conveyor belt carried it into the darkness beyond the shipping dock, where I knew the others were waiting. 38 years of co-workers who'd never really left, all of us trapped in the rhythm of work that had defined our lives. The whistle blew, marking the end of shift. But in places like this, the work never really ends. The realtor said someone would eventually tear it down, but 18 months later, my childhood home still stands at the end of Maple Street like a rotting tooth. I drive past it sometimes on my way to work, watching the ivy slowly consume the front porch, the shutters hanging at drunken angles. I hadn't been inside since Mom died in 2019. But last Tuesday, I got the call from Mrs. Chin next door. Someone had been turning lights on and off in the house at night. The electricity had been shut off for over a year, she said, voice shaking with concern. She wanted to know if I'd given anyone permission to be there. I hadn't. The key still worked, though the lock fought me like it didn't want to let me in. The smell hit first, not just dust and mildew, but something else. Something familiar that made my chest tighten with memory. Mom's perfume, white shoulders, still lingering in the stale air after all this time. The living room looked exactly as we'd left it when we moved her into the nursing home. Same floral wallpaper, same burgundy carpet with the stain from where I'd spilled grape juice when I was 8. The furniture was gone, of course, hauled away by Goodwill, but the impressions remained in the carpet like ghost outlines. That's when I noticed the family photos. They were scattered across the mantelpiece where Mom had always kept them, but I'd packed those pictures away myself. I remembered wrapping each frame in newspaper, sealing them in boxes marked for storage. Yet here they were, me at graduation, family Christmas mornings, Dad before the cancer took him. My hands trembled as I picked up the photo of my 10th birthday party. There I was, gap-toothed and grinning, blowing out candles while Mom watched from the background. But something was wrong with the image. The colors looked faded, like an old Polaroid, and Mom's face seemed distant. Sad in a way I'd never noticed before. I climbed the stairs to my old bedroom, each step creaking with familiar protest. The hallway stretched longer than I remembered, dark despite the afternoon light filtering through grimy windows. My bedroom door stood slightly open, and I could hear something inside. Humming. Soft and melodic, a lullaby I hadn't heard since childhood. I pushed the door open with my fingertips. Mom sat in the rocking chair by the window, the same chair where she'd nursed me through fevers and nightmares, sung me to sleep on restless nights. She looked exactly as I remembered her before the illness, before the treatments that had stolen her hair and hollowed her cheeks. She smiled when she saw me, that warm smile I'd missed so desperately. "Welcome home, sweetheart." Her voice was exactly right, every inflection familiar. I wanted to run to her, to collapse into her arms like I had as a child. But something kept me frozen in the doorway. Something about the way the afternoon light passed right through her, the way her rocking chair moved without touching the floor. I'd been dreaming about conversations with her for months, I realized. Phone calls where she'd ask about my job, my marriage, whether I was eating enough vegetables. I'd wake up reaching for the phone, convinced she'd actually called. But those conversations had felt real. More real than the funeral, more real than signing the papers to sell the house. More real than accepting that she was gone. "You never visit anymore," she said, still rocking gently. Her words hit like ice water. Because it was true. I'd avoided this house, avoided the memories, avoided dealing with the grief that lived in every corner of these rooms. I'd been too busy, too overwhelmed, too afraid of feeling that loss all over again. "I'm sorry, Mom. I couldn't handle coming back here." She nodded, understanding flooding her features. That's what I'd always loved about her. She never made me feel guilty for being human, for having limitations. "I know, honey, but you need to understand something." She stood up from the rocking chair, and I could see through her to the bedroom wall behind, to the height marks Dad had penciled there to track my growth. The numbers went from age 5 to 16, when I'd finally stopped caring about being the tallest kid in class. "I'm not the one who's been avoiding this place." The words didn't make sense at first. I opened my mouth to ask what she meant, but she was already fading, becoming translucent as morning mist. "Check the basement, David. Check what you left behind." The basement. I hadn't been down there since the day we cleaned out the house. Boxes of childhood belongings, old school papers, things I couldn't bear to throw away but couldn't bring myself to keep. The stairs groaned under my weight as I descended into darkness. My phone's flashlight revealed the same concrete walls, the same musty smell of earth and old wood. But there, in the corner where I'd stacked the storage boxes, was something I didn't remember leaving. A newspaper, folded and yellowed, dated 3 days ago. "Local man missing after CAR accident," the headline read. The photo showed my face, my driver's license picture staring back at me from newsprint. David Chun, 34, was last seen leaving Riverside Hospital following a head injury sustained in a collision on Route 9. Family members report he seemed disoriented and confused. Police are asking anyone with information. My hands shook as I read the article. The accident came flooding back, hydroplaning on wet pavement, the guardrail rushing toward me, the spinning world going dark. Waking up in the hospital with doctors asking my name, checking my pupils with tiny lights. I discharged myself against medical advice. Drove straight to Mom's house, key in my pocket, memories of her death suddenly fuzzy and uncertain. But she'd been dead for 2 years, not one. The funeral was in 2017, not 2019. The house had been empty all this time, and I'd been. The newspaper crumpled in my grip as understanding crashed over me like cold water. I wasn't visiting my childhood home. I was dying in it, brain bleeding from trauma I was too confused to understand, too stubborn to treat. And in my final hours, my damaged mind had created the one person who could help me feel safe. The person who'd always made everything better. Mom. The for sale sign has been leaning against that oak tree for 3 years now, paint peeling and wood warped from Nebraska weather. Grandpa's farmhouse sits empty at the end of the gravel road, 2 stories of white clapboard and broken dreams surrounded by fields that someone else works now. I inherited the place when he died, but I've never had the heart to set foot inside. Too many memories living in those rooms, too much history soaked into the floorboards. But the county's been sending letters about property taxes and structural inspections, and my wife Sarah keeps asking when I'm going to deal with it. So last Saturday, I finally drove out there. The screen door hung loose on its hinges, creaking in the wind like it was trying to tell me something. Grandpa had built this place in 1952, raised 4 kids here, buried Grandma from the front parlor in 1998. Every board and nail held decades of family life, of Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings and ordinary Tuesday evenings that seemed so important when you were living them. The key turned easily, like the house had been waiting for me. The smell inside was wrong. Not just dust and abandonment, but something else, coffee brewing, bacon frying, the lingering scent of Grandma's apple pie. Impossible smells that made my stomach growl and my eyes water with sudden emotion. The living room looked exactly as I remembered it from childhood visits. Same brown couch where Grandpa watched the evening news, same oval rug where I'd played with toy trucks while adults talked over my head. But everything was clean, fresh, like someone had been maintaining the place. That's when I heard the radio. Soft country music drifting from the kitchen, the same station Grandpa always listened to while doing morning chores. I followed the sound down the narrow hallway, past family photos that seemed to watch me walk by. The kitchen table was set for 2. Mismatched plates, paper napkins, silverware arranged exactly as Grandma used to do it. Steam rose from 2 coffee cups, and I could hear bacon sizzling in the cast iron pan on the stove. "Morning, Danny. You're just in time for breakfast." Grandpa stood at the stove, spatula in hand, wearing the same faded overalls and John Deere cap he'd worn every day of my childhood. He looked exactly as I remembered him at 70. Weathered hands, kind eyes, the slight stoop from decades of farm work. I should have been terrified. Should have run screaming from that kitchen. Instead, I felt a profound sense of peace, like I'd been traveling a long road and finally found my way home. "Sit down, boy. Eggs are almost ready." I sat in my old chair, the one that had been mine during summer visits when Mom would drop me off for a week of farm life. Grandpa moved around the kitchen with familiar efficiency, humming along to the radio, filling my plate with food that smelled like every childhood memory I'd ever treasured. We ate in comfortable silence, just like always. Grandpa never was one for unnecessary conversation, especially at breakfast. The food tasted exactly right, Grandma's biscuits, eggs from the henhouse, bacon from pigs they'd raised themselves. After we ate, he led me to the front porch. The farm stretched before us, green and golden in the morning light. I could see cattle in the distant pasture, hear the old windmill creaking in the breeze. Everything looked prosperous, well-maintained, alive. "Been waiting for you to come back," Grandpa said. His voice carried the same gentle authority it always had, never demanding but somehow impossible to ignore. He settled into his porch rocker, the one he'd carved from hickory, would back when I was in elementary school. I've missed this place. I'm sorry I stayed away so long. He nodded, understanding. Your grandmother, she always said you'd come back when you were ready. Said you needed time to figure out who you were, before you could appreciate where you came from. We rocked in silence for a while, watching the sun climb higher over fields that had fed our family for generations. I felt something settling in my chest, a knot of grief and guilt that had been tied tight for years finally beginning to loosen. I should have visited more before you died. Should have brought the grandkids to meet you. He reached over and patted my hand with fingers that felt solid and warm and real. You're here now. That's what matters. But even as he said it, I noticed something strange about the morning light. It wasn't moving the way sunlight should. The shadows stayed exactly the same, the angle never changing, like we were trapped in a single perfect moment. The radio in the kitchen was playing the same song on repeat. Grandpa was still rocking, still smiling, but when I looked closely, I could see he wasn't quite solid anymore. I could make out the porch boards through his overalls, see the morning sky through his weathered face. The breakfast dishes were gone from the kitchen table. The bacon smell had faded, but the coffee cups were still there, still steaming, still waiting. I stood up slowly, reality crashing back like cold water. The farm around us wasn't green and prosperous. It was overgrown, neglected, slowly returning to prairie grass. The cattle were long gone, the windmill broken and silent. I'd been sitting alone on that porch for hours, talking to empty air, eating food that existed only in my memory. The doctors at County General were very patient when the sheriff brought me in. Severe dehydration, they said. Heat exhaustion. Hallucinations brought on by emotional stress and physical collapse. They found me 3 days after I'd driven out to the farm, unconscious on Grandpa's porch with an empty stomach and a sunburned face. My car was still running in the driveway, gas tank empty, radio playing the same country station on repeat. Sarah cried when she saw me in the hospital bed. Said I'd been missing for days, that she'd been worried sick, that she never should have pushed me to deal with the farmhouse before I was ready. But I wasn't ready to let go of what I'd found there. Because here's what I didn't tell the doctors, what I've never told anyone. When they brought me my clothes from the farm, there were bacon grease stains on my shirt, coffee rings on the fabric where I'd wiped my hands, and in my pocket was a biscuit, still warm, wrapped in one of Grandma's embroidered napkins, the kind she'd been buried with 15 years ago. The old school. Lincoln Elementary closed in 2016 when the district consolidated, but I still dream about walking those hallways. 34 years I taught 3rd grade in room 18, watching generations of 8-year-olds learn to read, to add fractions, to raise their hands before speaking. When the wrecking ball comes next month, everything I built there will disappear forever. That's why I had to go back one last time. The security fence was easy enough to climb for someone my size. At 68, I'm not as spry as I used to be, but desperation makes you resourceful. The side entrance where teachers used to arrive at 7:30 still opened with my key. Maintenance never bothered changing the locks on an empty building. The hallway stretched before me in familiar twilight, illuminated by dusty shafts of afternoon light. My footsteps echoed against lockers that had been cleaned out but never removed, past bulletin boards stripped of their cheerful displays. The smell was all wrong. No paste and construction paper, no lunch trays and playground dust. Just emptiness and the faint chemical tang of industrial cleaning supplies. Room 18 sat exactly where I'd left it 3 years ago. The desks were gone, of course, along with my teaching supplies and the reading corner where struggling students would sit with picture books. But the chalkboard remained, and someone had written something across its green surface in neat cursive letters. Good morning, Mrs. Patterson. Today is Monday, September 15th. The weather is sunny and warm. My handwriting, the same daily greeting I'd written for 34 years, updating the date and weather each morning before my students arrived. But I'd never written September 15th, 2019. That was 6 months after the school closed. I should have left then. Should have accepted that my mind was playing tricks, that grief could make you see things that weren't there. Instead, I found myself walking to my old desk position, muscle memory guiding me to the spot where I'd stood for 3 decades of morning meetings. That's when I heard the voices. Soft at first, just whispers from the hallway. Then clearer, more distinct. Children's voices asking to use the bathroom, to get drinks of water, to sharpen pencils that had grown dull during math worksheets. "Mrs. Patterson, can you help me with this word?" The voice came from the back corner, where Timothy Morrison used to sit. Sweet Timothy with his thick glasses and quiet stutter, who'd struggled with reading until something clicked in November of his third grade year. He'd been in my class in 1987, but I could hear him as clearly as if he were 8 years old again. I turned toward the sound and saw him there, Timothy at 8, raising his hand tentatively, holding up a book I couldn't quite make out. Behind him sat Maria Santos, who'd moved to California in 1993. Next to her was David Chun, bright and eager, who'd grown up to become a teacher himself. All of them exactly as I remembered them. All of them 8 years old forever. The classroom filled slowly, students materializing in chairs that weren't there, opening books that existed only in memory. 34 years of children, all of them young, all of them looking at me with the trust and expectation I'd tried so hard to deserve. Jenny Williams was practicing her cursive letters. Bobby Peterson was counting on his fingers under his desk. Sarah Kim had her hand raised because she'd finished her assignment early and wanted to know what to do next. I started teaching, not consciously, but because it was what I'd always done. Reading groups and phonics lessons, addition problems on the chalkboard, gentle corrections, and patient explanations. The rhythm of it felt as natural as breathing, as necessary as heartbeat. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time moved differently in that empty classroom, flowing like honey, thick and sweet and impossible to measure. I taught students I'd loved and lost to time, helped them with problems they'd solved decades ago, watched them grow and learn and become the people they were meant to be. When the dismissal bell rang, they packed their imaginary backpacks and lined up by the door just like always. One by one, they hugged me goodbye, quick, fierce 8-year-old hugs that smelled like playground sunshine and grape juice boxes. "See you tomorrow, Mrs. Patterson." Timothy was the last to leave, still clutching that book I couldn't quite see. He looked up at me with those serious brown eyes behind thick lenses. "You were the best teacher I ever had. You made me love reading." Then he was gone, and I was alone in an empty room with a chalkboard full of lessons no one would ever erase. The janitor found me there Tuesday morning, sitting on the floor where my desk used to be. "Hypothermia," the paramedics said. I'd been in that unheated building all night, temperatures dropping below freezing, talking to myself in voices they could hear from the parking lot. The doctor at the hospital was kind but firm. "Early-stage dementia," she explained to my daughter. "Confusion, memory issues, difficulty distinguishing between past and present. Very common in people experiencing major life transitions." But they couldn't explain the book. Timothy's book, the one I'd finally been able to see clearly in those last moments before the janitor arrived. A worn copy of Charlotte's Web with a library checkout card still tucked inside. The same copy I'd given him in 1987 when his family moved away. The one he'd promised to return when he got settled in their new town. The librarian checked the records. Timothy Morrison had died in a car accident in 1999, 12 years after leaving my class. But there was his book, sitting on my hospital bedside table, returned exactly 32 years late. The checkout card was filled with dates in Timothy's careful 8-year-old handwriting. September through December 1987, over and over, like he'd been checking out the same book every week for 32 years, waiting for the right time to bring it back to his favorite teacher. The old office. The Meridian Insurance building has been empty for 2 years now, but I still have dreams about my cubicle on the 14th floor. 26 years I worked in that maze of gray fabric walls and fluorescent lights, processing claims and answering phones until the company moved operations overseas in 2022. They gave us all cardboard boxes and 3 weeks' notice. I drive past the building sometimes on my way to job interviews, watching pigeons roost on the window ledges where we used to eat lunch and complain about management. The parking garage is chained shut, and weeds grow through cracks in the sidewalk, but my badge still works on the side entrance. Security never bothered updating the system for a building nobody wanted. Last Thursday, I finally used it. The lobby felt cavernous without the reception desk and potted plants. My footsteps echoed against marble walls as I walked to the elevator bank, muscle memory guiding me to the same car I'd taken every morning for over 2 decades. The button still lit up when I pressed 14, and that familiar mechanical were carried me up to my old life. The 14th floor stretched before me in perfect silence, a wasteland of empty workstations and dangling Ethernet cables. But the layout was exactly as I remembered it. Accounting in the northeast corner, customer service along the windows, my claims department right in the middle of it all. Cubicle 14C, my home away from home. The desk was bare, of course, but I could still see the outline where my computer monitor had sat, the coffee ring stains that no amount of cleaning could remove. This was where I'd spent the better part of my adult life, processing accident reports and disability claims, talking frightened people through the worst days of their lives. That's when I noticed the red message light blinking on my desk phone. Impossible, of course. The phone system had been disconnected when the building emptied. But the light pulsed steadily, urgent and familiar, the same way it had blinked through thousands of ordinary workdays. I picked up the receiver. Meridian Insurance, Claims Department, this is Janet speaking. How can I help you? The words came automatically, the same greeting I'd used for 26 years. And somehow, impossibly, there was a voice on the other end. Oh, thank God, someone finally answered. My name is Robert Chin, policy number M4471B. I was in an accident yesterday, and nobody's returning my calls. His voice was strained, desperate. I knew that tone, people calling after car crashes or house fires, needing help navigating insurance bureaucracy when their worlds had just fallen apart. It was the sound of someone who needed an advocate, someone who cared. I opened my desk drawer, looking for claim forms that weren't there, and found them anyway. Neat stacks of paperwork, pens that wrote smoothly, a computer that hummed to life as soon as I touched the mouse. Let me pull up your file, Mr. Chin. Can you spell your last name for me? The claim was complex, multi-vehicle accident, disputed liability, medical bills mounting while lawyers argued over fault percentages. But I'd handled thousands of cases just like it. My fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, navigating insurance databases, cross-referencing policy details, building the paper trail that would get this man the help he needed. More calls followed. Sarah Kowalski with flood damage from a burst pipe. Marcus Washington, whose disability claim had been denied on a technicality. Linda Morrison, whose husband's death benefits were tied up in probate court. Each voice brought another cubicle to life around me. I could see my old co-workers settling into their workstations. Karen from accounting, Tom from customer service, even Mr. Phillips from management, looking harried and important as he rushed between meetings. The phones rang constantly, that familiar symphony of need and assistance that had been the soundtrack to my professional life. We worked with quiet efficiency, helping people rebuild what they'd lost, fighting bureaucracy from the inside, making the system work for those who needed it most. Hours passed without me noticing. Or maybe days. Time moved differently in that empty building, measured not in minutes but in claims processed, problems solved, lives made a little bit easier. It was the most productive day I'd had in years. The security guard found me Friday morning, slumped over my desk in cubicle 14C. Severe dehydration, they said at the hospital. I'd been there for 18 hours, talking to dial tone, typing on a keyboard that wasn't connected to anything. The doctor was gentle but concerned. Adjustment disorder, she explained to my wife. Sometimes people who've lost their sense of purpose experience breaks from reality, especially in familiar environments that trigger strong memories. But they couldn't explain the paperwork. Real claim forms, filled out in my handwriting, scattered across the empty desk. Policy numbers that checked out when the hospital called to verify. Names and phone numbers of real people who'd been trying to reach Meridian Insurance for months, getting nothing but voicemail and automated responses. Robert Chin confirmed he'd spoken to someone at Meridian the night before. A woman named Janet who'd expedited his claim, cut through the red tape, got him the settlement check he desperately needed. The company had been bankrupt for 2 years. There was no one left to take his call. Except me, sitting alone in an empty building, still trying to help people who needed it most. Still doing the job that had defined me, even after the job no longer existed. They're tearing down the Meridian building next month, but sometimes I still dream about my cubicle. About phones that ring with real voices, real problems that need real solutions. About the work that never really ends, even when the company dies. St. Mary's Medical Center has been shuttered for 4 years now, but I still wake up some nights hearing the code blue alarms echoing through empty corridors. 41 years I worked those halls as a registered nurse, from the maternity ward to the ICU, watching people take their first breaths and their last ones. When the new regional hospital opened across town in 2020, they transferred all the patients in a single weekend. By Monday morning, St. Mary's was a ghost of itself. Empty beds, silent monitors, medical equipment gathering dust under plastic sheets. But yesterday I got a call from my old supervisor, Helen. She said someone had been reporting lights on in the building at night, pharmacy alarms going off, even elevator music playing in the main lobby. The security company wanted to know if any former staff had kept their key cards, if someone might be accessing the building without authorization. My key card was right there in my purse, where it had been for 4 years. Still worked too. The main entrance opened with that familiar pneumatic hiss, and immediately I was hit with the smell. Not quite disinfectant, not quite decay, but something in between. The lobby looked smaller than I remembered, reception desks covered in dust sheets, artificial plants brown and brittle under flickering emergency lighting. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor, to the medical surgical unit, where I'd spent most of my career. The nurse's station sat empty, computer monitors dark, but the medication cart was exactly where I'd left it during my last shift in March 2020. Room 302 still had a patient chart hanging on the door. My hands shook as I pulled it from its plastic sleeve. Margaret Whitmore, age 73, admitted for complications from diabetes. I remembered her, sweet woman with worried eyes, always asking about her cats at home. But according to the chart, she'd been admitted yesterday. Impossible. The hospital had been closed for years. I pushed open the door to her room, expecting to find it empty like all the others. Instead, Mrs. Whitmore lay sleeping in the bed, her drip running steady, monitors beeping softly in the dim light. "Oh, thank goodness," she said when she saw me. "I've been ringing for a nurse for hours. My blood sugar feels low again." Her voice was exactly as I remembered it, thin and reedy but determined. She looked frilier than before, but her eyes held the same mixture of fear and trust that I'd seen in countless patients over 4 decades of nursing. I checked her chart automatically, muscle memory taking over. Blood glucose levels were indeed dropping, insulin dosage needed adjustment. My hands moved with practiced efficiency, calculating medication ratios, checking for flow rates, doing the job I'd done for so long it felt like breathing. Room 304 had a post-surgical patient who needed pain medication. Room 306 housed an elderly man recovering from pneumonia, asking for water and worried about his insurance coverage. One by one, I moved through rooms that should have been empty, caring for patients who couldn't possibly be there. But they were real. Their needs were real. Their gratitude was real. The night stretched on with familiar rhythm, medication rounds, vital sign checks, small comforts offered to people facing illness and uncertainty. Other nurses appeared gradually, faces I recognized from years of working together. Helen from the supervisor's office, looking harried but competent as always. Tom from the ICU, making his rounds with quiet professionalism. We worked together like we'd never stopped, like those 4 years of emptiness had been just a long weekend. The monitors beeped, the call lights flashed, and we answered them all with the dedication that had defined our professional lives. Around dawn, I realized something was wrong with the morning light. It wasn't moving the way sunlight should, wasn't getting brighter as the hours passed. The digital clocks on the monitors all showed the same time, 3:17 a.m., no matter how long I watched them. Mrs. Whitmore was still in room 302, but when I looked closely, I could see the empty bed through her translucent form. The 4 bag that had been nearly full was now empty, had been empty for years. Tom was still making his ICU rounds, but the ICU had been gutted when the hospital closed. The monitors he was checking had been removed, sold at auction to help pay the facility's debts. I looked down at my hands, at the medication I'd been preparing, and saw they were empty. Had been empty all along. The paramedics found me Sunday morning, collapsed at the nurse's station on the 3rd floor. Severe dehydration, they said. Exhaustion. I'd been in that empty building for 36 hours, moving from room to room, talking to patients who weren't there, performing procedures with equipment that had been removed years ago. The doctor at the new regional hospital was kind, but concerned. Sometimes people who've dedicated their entire lives to caregiving experience psychotic breaks when that purpose is removed, she explained to my daughter. The mind creates scenarios where they can continue helping others, even when no one needs help. But the thing is, people did need help. The pharmacy logs showed someone had been accessing the building's emergency medication supplies for months. Insulin, pain relievers, antibiotics, all missing from locked cabinets that should have been impossible to open. And yesterday, Margaret Whitmore called the hospital. She wanted to thank the nurse who'd adjusted her insulin pump during a diabetic episode at her apartment complex 6 months ago. A nurse who'd appeared out of nowhere at 3 in the morning, made the necessary changes, then disappeared before the paramedics arrived. She described me perfectly, down to the St. Mary's name badge I'd been wearing in that empty building. The building that had been locked and empty for 4 years. But sometimes the work doesn't end just because the workplace closes. Sometimes the calling is stronger than the circumstances, and people who've spent their lives healing others find ways to keep helping, even when logic says it's impossible. The medication cabinet keys are still in my pocket, just in case someone needs them. It was supposed to be nothing more than a detour. A quick stop to stretch my legs, maybe snap a few photos before heading home. The highway had been empty for hours, and when I saw the faded wooden sign pointing toward a coastal resort I'd never heard of, curiosity got the better of me. The paint on the sign had cracked so badly it looked like dry riverbeds, and the letters were barely readable, something like Sea Crest or Sea Cliff. An arrow pointed toward a narrow road, choked with weeds pushing up through the cracked asphalt. The change in atmosphere was instant. The breeze from the ocean that I'd felt on the main road disappeared, replaced by a heavy, stagnant heat that clung to my skin. The trees closed in around the road, their branches weaving together overhead, letting only thin slices of daylight through. My tires crunched over gravel and bits of broken glass. This was the kind of place that, decades ago, might have been in glossy travel brochures, white sand beaches, cocktails by the pool, but now looked like it had been left to rot in silence. The road ended in a vast, cracked parking lot. I expected to see at least a few cars, maybe staff vehicles, but it was completely empty except for an overturned shopping cart lying on its side like it had been abandoned mid-use. The main building stood ahead, huge but broken. The balconies sagged, railings rusted through, and large patches of the roof had collapsed. The windows gaped like open mouths, some covered in warped boards. Even with the ocean less than 200 feet away, the air didn't smell of salt. It smelled damp, stale, and faintly metallic. I left my car door open as I stepped out, telling myself I'd only be a minute. My footsteps echoed strangely in the stillness, the sound muffled but lingering, like the place was swallowing noise rather than letting it go. A few weather-torn banners hung from leaning poles along the entrance path. The images of palm trees and tropical flowers on them were barely visible beneath layers of grime. The lobby was massive and shadowed. The front desk stretched across one side, its marble countertop cracked down the center like it had been struck. Behind it, rows of old metal hooks still held tarnished keys with paper tags curling from moisture. The carpet squished unpleasantly under my shoes where rain had leaked through holes in the ceiling. Ceiling fans hung down on crooked rods, and a few swayed lazily, though there was no breeze. I moved deeper into the building, the silence pressing closer with each step. A grand staircase curved upward in the center, but I chose one of the side hallways. My shoes stuck slightly to the warped wooden places. Doors stood ajar, revealing rooms stripped of anything valuable but still holding ghost traces of past guests. Beds with sagging mattresses, curtains shredded into strips, lamps without bulbs. Dust coated everything in a thick, undisturbed layer. Halfway down the hall, I heard it, a dull, hollow thud from somewhere above me. At first, I thought a section of the roof had fallen, but the sound came again, slow, deliberate, evenly spaced. I stopped breathing for a second, straining to listen. It stopped, leaving only the faint creaks of the building settling. I told myself it was probably a bird, or maybe a raccoon. But some stubborn part of me needed to know. At the far end of the hall, a narrow staircase climbed to the second floor. The railing was soft with rot, and the steps sagged under my weight. The second-floor hallway was darker, hotter, the air heavier in my lungs. Every step stirred up the stench of mildew and something sharper, like sweat soaked deep into old fabric. I passed room after room until I reached one with its door shut. The thud came again, loud enough now to make my ribs feel it. It came from inside. The handle was rusted, but it turned with surprising ease. The door swung inward, and the room looked almost identical to the others, except for the suitcase sitting in the exact center of the floor. It was old, the kind with leather straps, but unlike everything else here, it was clean. Too clean. The thud came again, not from the suitcase, but from the closet in the far corner. Something inside shifted with a faint scraping sound. Every muscle in my body told me to leave, but I couldn't move right away. I stood there listening, my heartbeat matching the rhythm of the sound. Then I stepped back, pulling the door closed behind me. The hallway was silent for maybe 3 seconds. Then footsteps. Not shuffling, not the uneven noise of an animal. Heavy, quick footsteps, coming from the direction of the room I'd just left. I didn't look back. My pace quickened until I was almost running. The floorboards flexed under me, and the walls seemed to close in. The staircase groaned under my weight as I bounded down it, my hands sliding on the dusty rail. In the lobby, the dim light felt blinding compared to upstairs. I didn't stop to look around. I went straight through the doors, out into the heat, toward my car. I froze halfway across the lot. The passenger side door was open. I knew I'd left it closed. A pulse of cold spread through me. I forced myself forward, glancing inside. On the passenger seat sat the same suitcase I'd seen upstairs. The straps were undone, the lid slightly open. I didn't want to touch it, but my hands moved without asking me. I lifted the lid. Inside was only a single Polaroid photograph, face down. My fingers trembled as I turned it over. It was a picture of me, taken from above, standing in the lobby. The date printed along the white border was today's. It was just meant to be a shortcut. A small, unlit access road that cut under the train tracks and saved me 10 minutes of driving. I'd taken it once before during the day, but never at night. That evening, the sun had already dipped below the horizon, and the only light came from my headlights slicing through the heavy blue of dusk. The entrance to the tunnel looked like something out of another era. Brick archway, rusted metal doors bolted permanently open, graffiti layered over decades. The road dipped down and vanished into black. As soon as my tires hit the incline, the air seemed to change. The sound of the engine deepened, bouncing off the curved walls. My headlights lit the tunnel ahead, revealing chipped tiles and rust streaks running down from the ceiling. Water dripped from somewhere high above, landing in shallow puddles along the edges of the narrow lane. About halfway in, I noticed something strange. My headlights caught a shape ahead, just a sliver, half hidden against the wall. A shopping cart. It was pushed sideways, one wheel bent, its handle wrapped with something dark like cloth. It shouldn't have been there. I slowed down, steering to avoid it, but as my front bumper passed it, I heard the sound. A slow metallic clang, echoing off the walls, not from the cart, but from deeper inside the tunnel. I told myself it could have been anything, pipes contracting, a loose panel shifting, but the sound came again. This time sharper, like metal on metal. I rolled forward at barely 10 miles per hour. The yellow light of my high beams revealed another object lying in the middle of the road. A single shoe. Scuffed leather, the kind someone might wear to work. It was facing toward me, as if someone had been walking away from the far end and just stepped out of it. I kept going, heart starting to pound harder. The far exit of the tunnel was just a rectangle of faint light ahead, but it didn't seem to be getting closer as quickly as it should have. That's when I saw movement. It was small at first, just a flicker in the corner of my vision. Then, in the reflection of a wet patch on the wall, I saw a shadow cross the road ahead. Not walking, sliding, as if someone moved fast without lifting their feet. My hands gripped the steering, well so tight it hurt. I told myself it was just another driver, or maybe someone passing through. But the road ahead was empty. The echo of my tires was the only sound. I reached the midpoint between the two ends of the tunnel. My headlights caught something that made my stomach twist. The far exit, the one I was driving toward, was no longer open. Thick metal doors, identical to the ones at the entrance, were shut tight across it. I couldn't remember ever seeing them closed before. I braked hard, tires squealing on the damp surface. The echo stretched unnaturally, bouncing back from the walls in a way that made it hard to tell where it began and ended. That was when the sound started, a slow, deliberate dragging somewhere behind me. I didn't want to turn around, but my rearview mirror gave me no choice. At the far end, just inside the open entrance, a figure stood. The light from outside was weak, but enough to outline their shape. Tall, broad-shouldered, not moving. The dragging sound continued, though the figure didn't step forward. It was something else, something on the ground, being pulled toward me. I shifted into reverse, ready to back out, but my headlights caught the wall just behind my car. The open entrance I'd driven through minutes earlier was gone. The same heavy doors as the far end now sealed it off. The dragging grew louder. My breath came fast, my eyes darting between the mirrors and the walls. The figure at the far end began to walk, not quickly but steadily. Every step echoed, mixing with the scrape of something metal on the floor. I tried the horn. The sound died in the thick air, muffled almost instantly. I thought about getting out, about running toward whichever end opened first, but the space felt wrong, too narrow, the air too thick. The figure kept coming, the shadows swallowing their face. When they reached the middle of the tunnel, they stopped. The dragging sound continued for a moment, then ceased. My ears rang in the sudden silence. And then both sets of doors slammed open at once. Daylight flooded in from both sides, blinding me. By the time my eyes adjusted, the tunnel was empty. No figure, no shoe, no shopping cart, just the damp, cracked road stretching ahead. I drove out without looking back. 2 days later, I passed the same road during the day. The entrance was chained shut, a fresh padlock sealing the rusted doors. A paper notice hung there, flapping in the breeze. It said the tunnel had been sealed for 5 years due to structural instability. I don't know how to explain what I drove through that night. It was meant to save me 10 minutes. A shortcut I'd taken once in daylight, but never at night. An unlit access road that dipped under the train tracks and rejoined the main route beyond. That evening, the sun had vanished behind the horizon, leaving only the weak, grainy light of my headlights cutting through the dark. The tunnel entrance was like something from another century. Arched brick, stained and crumbling, its rusted metal gates bolted open so long they had fused with the hinges. Graffiti in layers, names, symbols, crude faces, covered almost every inch. Beyond the archway, the road curved downward into a long, black throat. The moment I crossed into it, the air changed. The warmth of the summer night turned damp and cold. My engine's hum deepened, every sound bouncing off the rounded walls in overlapping echoes. The tiles along the inside were chipped, streaked with rust from decades of water leaking through the ceiling. A thin stream trickled down one wall, the drip, 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 keeping time with my tires rolling slowly over the uneven asphalt. About 100 feet in, my headlights caught something on the right side. A shopping cart. Bent, one wheel twisted sideways, its handle wrapped with what looked like a torn black hoodie. It sat against the wall like someone had abandoned it in a hurry. I eased around it, my side mirror nearly grazing the wall. The moment I passed, a metallic clang rang out from deeper ahead. Not a random creak or harmless echo. This was sharp and deliberate. My first thought was that someone else was in here. A maintenance worker, maybe. But there were no cones, no equipment, no signs of activity. I kept going. That's when my headlights picked out a single shoe lying dead center in the lane. A man's shoe, dark leather, laces untied, scuffed as if it had been dragged. It was pointed toward me. Something in my gut told me to turn back. But the tunnel was narrow, barely enough for one vehicle, and reversing that far in total darkness felt worse. I pressed on, eyes locked on the pale glow of the far exit. It should have been getting closer, but it didn't feel like it. The distance between me and the opening seemed stubborn wrong. Then I saw movement. It was just a flash in the corner of my eye, a reflection in the wet wall. A shadow crossing the road ahead, smooth and silent, as if gliding rather than walking. My grip on the steering wheel tightened until my hands ached. I scanned the road. Empty. I reached what should have been the midpoint when my heart dropped. The far exit, the rectangle of faint light, was gone. Replaced by two massive metal doors, shut completely across the opening. I hadn't heard them close. I slammed the brakes. My tires squealed, the sound bouncing from wall to wall in warped repetition. My ears rang. Then came the dragging. Slow at first. A heavy scrape along the asphalt from somewhere behind me. I checked my rearview mirror and froze. The entrance I'd come through, now it too was shut. The same kind of massive doors sealed tight. And there, just inside them, stood a figure. They were tall, shoulders squared, their outline sharp against the dim light leaking in through the cracks in the doors. They didn't move. The dragging continued, louder now. It wasn't them. It was something on the ground between us, being pulled toward my car. Something long, metallic, glinting in the headlights. I tried to back up, then realized there was nowhere to go. The space felt tighter, the walls almost leaning in. The air had gone sour, metallic, thick in my throat. The figure began walking toward me. Not rushing, just steady, purposeful steps. Each one echoed unnaturally, overlapping on itself until I couldn't tell how far they really were. My horn blared, but the sound seemed swallowed instantly, as if the air itself refused to carry it. They stopped just short of the light from my high beams. I couldn't see their face, only the black outline of their head, tilted slightly like they were studying me. The metallic object lay at their feet now, a length of steel pipe, its end worn and dark-stained. We stayed like that, unmoving, for what felt like minutes. Then, without warning, both sets of doors slammed open at once. Blinding daylight poured in from both ends. When my vision cleared, the tunnel was empty. No figure. No shoe. No cart. The asphalt ahead was bare and slick. I drove forward without looking back, my hands still shaking on the wheel. 2 days later, passing the same route in daylight, I saw the tunnel chain shut. A fresh padlock sealed the gates. A paper notice flapped in the breeze, warning that the structure had been condemned and sealed off 5 years ago. I haven't taken a shortcut since. I had never liked parking garages. Too enclosed, too many shadows, too much sound bouncing in ways that made it hard to know where anything was. But this one was the only spot near the building where I had a late meeting, so I pulled in and found a space on the top floor. The air up there was cooler, moving freely through the open sides, but the stairwell I had to take down to the lobby was the opposite, narrow, concrete, and poorly lit. The moment I stepped inside, the air shifted. It smelled faintly of damp cement and something else, stale like old sweat left in a gym bag. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed faintly, its plastic cover yellowed and cracked. My footsteps rang louder than they should have, sharp and hollow, the sound spiraling up and down through the shaft. The stairwell had a solid metal door at each landing, each one marked with a floor number in peeling paint. I took the first set of steps down quickly, then turned the corner for the next flight. That was when I heard it. Footsteps, not echoing in sync with mine. These came after, just a fraction of a second delayed, like someone was matching my pace but staying a floor above. I froze mid-step, listening. The air felt heavier all of a sudden. I waited for the sound again, but the stairwell went silent except for the faint hum of the light above me. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the sound had bounced weirdly off the walls. I kept going, moving faster this time. When I reached the next landing, the sound returned. This time slower. Step. 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 It was above me again. Whoever it was, they weren't rushing. They were pacing their descent to match mine, but staying out of sight. I glanced at the door to the next floor, considering stepping out, but my meeting was on the ground level, and the hallway through the offices would be longer. I decided to keep going, taking the stairs 2 at a time. The sound matched me. I could feel my pulse in my throat now. Each floor I passed seemed emptier, quieter. I didn't hear doors opening, no voices, no movement except the echo of our steps, mine quick and sharp, theirs steady and deliberate. On the 3rd floor down, the stairwell light flickered. Not off completely, just enough to dim and brighten in uneven pulses. My shadow on the wall jumped in size and shape, distorting with each flicker. Step! 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 I gripped the railing and turned fast into the next flight, but something made me stop halfway down. The sound was no longer above me. It was below. Step! 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 Slow, dragging steps, as if whoever it was had all the time in the world. I stayed frozen for a second too long, my brain struggling to process how they could have gotten below me without passing. Then instinct kicked in, and I bolted upward, taking the stairs 3 at a time. My shoes smacked against the concrete, my breathing loud in the confined space. The footsteps below sped up too. I didn't look back. I just kept climbing, the light above flickering more violently now, the buzzing louder in my ears. The air felt hotter, tighter, pressing against my chest. I reached the door to the roof level and shoved it open, spilling out into the open night air. My car was just a few spaces away. I sprinted to it, fumbling with the keys, my eyes darting to the stairwell door behind me. It didn't open. I got in, locked the doors, and sat there, trying to slow my breathing. The stairwell door stayed shut, the metal silent under the dim rooftop lights. After a minute, I started to believe maybe I'd imagined it, misheard echoes, paranoia in a place I already didn't like. Then I saw the smudge. A long, dark streak on the outside of my driver's side window. Fresh, like someone had dragged their fingers along the glass as they passed. I never heard the door open. I had never liked parking garages. Too enclosed, too many corners and shadows, too much sound bouncing in ways that made it impossible to tell where anything really was. But this one was the only spot near the building where I had a late meeting, so I pulled in and parked on the top floor. The air up there was cool, drifting through the open sides of the concrete structure. I could see the city lights far below, muted by a thin layer of haze. The stairwell I had to take down to the lobby was at the far corner, narrow, concrete, and lit by a single flickering fluorescent. The moment I stepped inside, the temperature changed. The moving air was gone, replaced by still, warm heaviness. The place smelled faintly of damp cement and something else, stale, like old sweat trapped in cloth. The door shut behind me with a metallic clang that seemed louder than it should have been. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed softly, the plastic cover yellowed and cracked. My footsteps echoed down the shaft, each one sharp and hollow, spiraling up and down so that I couldn't tell exactly where they landed. The walls were unpainted concrete, pocked and stained, the kind of surface that always seemed faintly damp to the touch. The stairwell had a metal door at each landing, each one marked with a floor number in peeling paint. I took the first set of steps down quickly, my hand grazing the cool steel railing. Turning the corner to the next flight, I heard it. Footsteps. Not mine. They came just a fraction of a second after mine, close enough to be linked, but wrong. I stopped halfway down the steps and listened. The sound stopped too. The only thing I could hear was the faint hum from the light overhead. I told myself it was just an echo. Sound behaved strangely in these places. I started walking again, faster this time. On the next landing, I heard them again. Step, step, step. Slower now, deliberate. I knew then it wasn't an echo. I glanced at the door to that floor, thinking about stepping out into the hallway, but my meeting was on the ground level, and taking the interior corridors would be longer and require badge access. I decided to keep going down. The sound matched me, above me still, a floor up. The stairwell was open in the middle, so if I looked up, I could see the railings spiraling all the way to the top. But the overhead light wasn't strong enough to reveal much beyond 2 floors. On the next flight down, the light overhead flickered once, twice. My shadow warped and jumped with each flicker, stretching thin across the wall before snapping back to size. Step, step, step. The sound was closer now. I quickened my pace, my free hand gripping the railing tight enough to make my knuckles ache. My breathing started to sound too loud in the stillness. I reached the 3rd floor down, and that's when the sound changed. It wasn't above me anymore. Step, step, step. It was below. I froze on the landing, my pulse hammering in my ears. The way the sound echoed in the concrete box made it impossible to judge exactly how far below they were, but it wasn't far. My mind tripped over the question. How could they be below me? The only way down was the stairs I was on. They would have had to pass me. I didn't wait to figure it out. I turned and started back up, moving fast, my shoes smacking against the concrete. The footsteps below changed too, faster now, chasing the sound of mine. I didn't look down. I didn't want to see. The light above flickered more violently as I climbed, buzzing louder, the plastic cover rattling faintly with the vibration. The air seemed hotter the higher I went, thick in my lungs, tasting faintly metallic. I reached the door to the roof level and shoved it open so hard it bounced against the wall. The sudden rush of cool night air hit me, sharp in my chest. My car was just a few spaces away. I ran for it, fumbling with my keys, my eyes locked on the stairwell door. It didn't open. I slid into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and sat there gripping the wheel. My breathing was uneven, loud in the enclosed space. The door stayed shut, the metal surface blank under the rooftop lights. I started to think maybe I'd imagined it, misread echoes, let my dislike of stairwells get the better of me. Then I saw the smudge. A long, dark streak running across the outside of my driver's side window. Fresh, for parallel lines, unevenly spaced, like fingertips dragged across the glass. I never heard the door open. I'd been driving for hours through nothing but flat, empty land. No houses, no streetlights, not even a glow on the horizon. Just my headlights cutting through the darkness and the low hum of the engine filling the silence. The map showed a rest stop ahead, one of the old, isolated ones that still had picnic tables and vending machines. I wasn't tired, but I needed to stretch and check my phone's signal. The turnoff came suddenly, a break in the thin white line along the road. The access road was short but rough, the gravel crunching under my tires as I rolled toward a small, dimly lit lot. 2 overhead lamps flickered on tall poles, their cones of light leaving the edges in shadow. The place was empty. No trucks, no cars. Just a single building with restrooms, its paint peeling in long strips, and 2 picnic tables under a warped wooden shelter. A vending machine stood by the wall, humming faintly, its glass fogged over from the inside. I stepped out, the night air cool and dry against my skin. The silence was deep, no insects, no wind, nothing. My footsteps on the gravel seemed unnaturally loud as I walked toward the shelter. I stood for a moment, stretching my legs, glancing around at the open blackness beyond the weak light. That's when I saw it. A shape, out past the edge of the lot, just where the light gave way to darkness. At first, I thought it was a bush or a rock, but it was too tall, too thin. It didn't move. I turned away, telling myself not to overthink it. Remote places played tricks on your eyes. I went to the vending machine, pulled a drink from my pocket, and took a sip. When I glanced back, the shape was closer. Still in shadow, still motionless, but no longer where it had been. A prickle ran up my spine. I told myself maybe I'd misjudged the distance, but my body didn't believe it. I slid my phone from my pocket and checked the signal. No bars. I decided to head back to my car. As I walked, I kept my eyes on the shape. It didn't move. I opened my door, got in, and shut it quietly. I locked the doors. For a moment, I just sat there, watching it from behind the glass. My headlights weren't aimed that way, but I could see enough in the spill of light from the lot to make out its outline, narrow, upright, head slightly tilted. Then, in the space of a blink, it was gone. Not faded. Not stepped back. Just not there anymore. I turned the key, engine rumbling to life. The sound seemed too loud in the stillness. I shifted into reverse, eyes flicking to the mirrors, scanning for movement. That's when I saw it again. It was in the lot now, at the far end, near the other picnic table. Same height, same tilt of the head. Closer than before. I didn't think. I threw the car into drive and started toward the exit. The tires skidded slightly on the gravel before gripping. As I pulled onto the highway, my pulse was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The beam of my headlights caught the road ahead, empty, straight for miles. I told myself to focus forward, to get distance between me and whatever that was. But 5 minutes later, I looked in the rearview mirror. Something was running in the darkness behind me. No lights, no car, just a shape, keeping pace in the faint glow of my taillights. Too fast for a person. Too steady. I pressed harder on the gas, the speedometer needle climbing. The shape stayed in view, impossibly even, matching my speed. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished from the mirror. I didn't slow down until I reached the next town, 30 miles away. Even then, I didn't stop. I haven't taken a rural rest stop since.